A werewolf shifter romance, for you. Prologue. The wind on the jagged peaks of the Great Divide did not blow, it howled like a dying wolf. For 10 centuries, the snow on these borderlands had never been white. It was permanently stained a deep, rust-colored crimson, soaked through by the endless, brutal wars between the northern Frostclaw Kingdom and the southern Bloodstalkers. Generation after generation of shifters had thrown themselves into the meat grinder of the valley, fighting for territory, for pride, and for a deep-seated hatred that had long outlived its original cause. But tonight, the slaughter was scheduled to end. At the very center of the frozen plateau, surrounded by a tense guard of 500 elite warriors from each side, 2 men stood facing each other. They did not look like men, they looked like mountains carved from muscle, scar tissue, and raw authority. To the north stood Alpha King Garrick of the Frostclaws. His armor was forged from plates of dark iron and trimmed with the thick, silver-white fur of the Arctic wolves he commanded. His eyes were a piercing, frozen blue, a stark contrast to the man across from him. To the south stood Alpha King Magnus of the Bloodstalkers. He wore gold-flecked crimson armor that caught the dim light of the setting sun, his dark skin marked by the claw wounds of 100 duels. His amber eyes burned with a restless, predatory heat. Between them lay a massive, flat slab of black stone, the ancient altar of the Divide. "We have bled each other dry," Garrick, Magnus growled, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that shook the loose snow from the rocks. "The rivers run red. Our nurseries are thinning. If this war continues for another century, there will be no wolves left to claim these lands." A rare moment of wisdom from a Bloodstalker, Garrick replied coldly, his breath misting heavily in the freezing air. "But a simple handshake will not bind our packs. The hatred runs too deep in our youth. The moment we turn our backs, a warrior will cross the line, a throat will be torn, and the cycle will begin anew." "Then we don't bind our words," Magnus said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We bind our blood." An ancient shaman, his face hidden behind a mask made from a bear's skull, stepped forward from the shadows. In his gnarled hands, he held a ceremonial dagger forged from meteorite iron, a blade capable of cutting through an alpha's supernatural hide. The shaman did not speak, but his presence brought an absolute, suffocating silence over the 1,000 warriors watching from the slopes. He knew the prophecy. Both kings knew it. The treaty they were about to sign was not just a political agreement. It was a cosmic trigger. The prophecy foretold that a true peace could only be achieved when the absolute purity of the northern ice merged with the primal heat of the southern fire. The first female child born to the pure royal line of the Frostclaws would be legally, spiritually, and supernaturally bound to the first male child born to the pure royal line of the Bloodstalkers. They would marry on the night of her 18th year, merging the 2 most powerful bloodlines in existence. The prophecy promised that their union would birth a being so immensely powerful that the fractured era of warring packs would end forever, giving rise to a single, unified age of kings. But prophecies are double-edged swords. The shaman's ancient texts also held a final, terrifying warning: should a rival wolf interfere, should the bride be stolen, or should the vow be broken by pride or deceit, the sky will bleed, and the pack responsible will be erased from the face of the earth. Garrick stepped up to the stone altar. Without a single blink of hesitation, he dragged his palm across the jagged edge of the meteorite blade. Deep, dark alpha blood welled in his hand, thick and steaming in the cold. He pressed his bleeding palm flat against the black stone. For the peace of the north, Garrick intoned, the magic of the oath binding his words. "I offer the future of my bloodline. The first daughter of the Frostclaw crown belongs to the south. Magnus stepped forward next. He took the dagger, slicing his own palm with a fierce, defiant grin. He slammed his hand directly over Garrick's, their royal blood mingling and spilling over the edges of the altar, turning the fresh snow beneath him into a boiling, crimson slush. For the dominance of the south, Magnus roared, his eyes flashing a dominant, gold-flecked amber. I claim her for my house. My firstborn son will take her, and together they will rule the world. As their blood fused on the ancient stone, a sudden, unnatural tremor rippled through the earth. High above them, the clouds parted, revealing a massive, perfectly round moon. But it wasn't white. For a brief, terrifying 5 seconds, a shadow crept over the lunar surface, turning the entire sky a deep, bruised shade of violet and blood red. The warriors on the slopes groaned, many dropping to their knees to shield their eyes. The wolves within them howled in a sudden, inexplicable panic, not a howl of anger, but of primal, unadulterated terror. The kings broke their grip, looking up at the bleeding sky. The treaty of red snow was sealed. The trap was set. And 18 years in the future, a girl named Elara would wake up in an ice castle, completely unaware that her heart had already been signed away to a stranger to keep the world from burning. If you are obsessed with stories about dark royal secrets, forced treaties, and underdogs who are about to shatter the world, you are in the exact right place. Welcome back to Lily's Heart Tales. If you're new here, don't get left behind in the snow. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of our serialized fiction. To my loyal pack members who return every week, drop a heart in the comments right now to show your loyalty to the North. Let's dive into the full story. Chapter 1. The Frostclaw Ice Citadel was an architectural marvel, a towering fortress carved directly into the heart of a frozen mountain glacier. Under the light of the perpetual northern winter, its walls of reinforced, enchanted ice didn't look like stone, they looked like polished silver, reflecting the cold blue hues of the sky. To the rest of the world, it was a monument to absolute power and royal legacy. To Elara, it was a silver cage. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her high tower chamber, staring at the reflection of the girl trapped inside a heavy, silk wedding gown. The dress was a masterpiece of northern craftsmanship, embroidered with thousands of microscopic diamonds that caught the candlelight, trimmed with white fox fur along the high collar, and corseted so tightly she could barely draw a full breath. Her long, pale blonde hair had been braided into an intricate crown atop her head, held in place by silver pins. She looked like a queen. She looked perfect. She felt like a corpse being decorated for burial. Stand still, Elara, her mother, Queen Vanya, snapped gently, tugging sharply on the silk laces at the back of the gown. The southern emissaries have already crossed the frozen bridge. Prince Kael's vanguard is entering the courtyard. This is the moment our kingdom has anticipated for 18 years. Do not ruin it with a slouch. I am standing still, mother, Elara whispered, her voice sounding small against the vast, echoing ice walls of the room. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling despite her best efforts to remain numb. I am standing exactly where the treaty demands I stand. Vanya paused, sighing as she placed her cold, ring-adorned hands on Elara's shoulders, meeting her daughter's gaze in the reflection. I know you didn't choose this, my child. But you are a princess of the pure Frostclaw line. Your blood carries the weight of 1,000-year peace. When you join with Prince Kael tonight under the blood moon, you will ensure our people never have to bleed on the red snow again. Elara swallowed the bitter taste of resentment rising in her throat. My blood, she thought. Always my blood. That is all they care about. Because behind the beautiful dress, the diamond pins, and the royal lineage lay a dark, suffocating secret that the Frostclaw Kingdom had spent 18 years desperately hiding from the rest of the world. Elara was a dud. In a world where every single member of the pack underwent their first shift at the age of 13, feeling the bone-snapping ecstasy of meeting their inner wolf, Elara had felt nothing. On her 13th birthday, she had stood in the sacred grove, waiting for the spirit of the Arctic wolf to claim her. The moon had risen, the pack had watched, and nothing had happened. Her bones remained human. Her senses remained dull. Her soul remained quiet. To the brutal, survival of the fittest culture of the shifters, a wolf who couldn't shift was lower than an omega. She was an anomaly. A parasite. A broken link in a chain of apex predators. The only reason her father hadn't banished her to the frozen wastes was because of the Treaty of Red Snow. The vow didn't demand a warrior, it demanded the firstborn female of the pure bloodline. She was a political bargaining chip, a fragile human-shaped key meant to open the door to a new era for two kingdoms. The pack tolerated her presence, bowing to her in public while whispering words like useless and weak the moment her back was turned. A loud, resonant horn blew from the courtyard below, its deep, metallic vibration rattling the ice panes of her window. They are here, Queen Vanya whispered, her eyes flashing a sudden, dominant wolf blue as her inner beast reacted to the arrival of rival royalty. She gave Elara's laces one final, tight pull. Dry your eyes, Elara. Put on your crown. A dud or not, tonight you become the bride of the South. Her mother swept out of the room, leaving Elara alone in the freezing silence. Elara walked slowly to the window, placing her bare, human palm against the frost-covered glass. Down below, entering the grand gates of the citadel, was a massive procession of golden and crimson banners. The Bloodstalkers had arrived. She closed her eyes, praying to a moon that had ignored her for 18 years, wishing for a miracle, a strike of lightning, or a sudden avalanche, anything to stop the golden cage from closing around her. She didn't know that deep within the forbidden woods, far beyond the borders of her father's kingdom, a pair of dark, celestial eyes had just opened, answering a call she hadn't even realized she was sending. The grand hall of the ice citadel was a cavern of glittering terror. Thousands of heavy crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ice ceiling, their candles casting a fractured, diamond-like glow over the hundreds of Frostclaw aristocrats lining the perimeter. A tense, thick silence filled the air, so fragile that the drop of a single pin would have sounded like a declaration of war. Then, the massive ironwood doors were thrown open. Announcing His Royal Highness, Prince Kael of the Bloodstalker Kingdom. Vanguard of the South and heir to the Crimson Throne. The herald's voice had barely faded before the heavy, rhythmic thud of armored boots shook the floor. Elara stood at the top of the tiered dais beside her father, King Garrick, her fingers digging so tightly into the silk of her skirt that her knuckles turned white. Prince Kael did not walk into the room, he commanded it. He was a mountain of a man, his presence an oppressive wave of pure, unadulterated heat that immediately began to fight against the ambient chill of the ice hall. His armor was magnificent, plates of dark, polished steel inlaid with veins of real gold and draped in a heavy crimson cape trimmed with black wolf fur. His dark skin was flawless save for a single, rugged scar cutting across his jawline, and his hair was a crown of dense, dark curls. But it was his eyes that made Elara's breath catch. They were a brilliant, piercing amber, burning with a restless, predatory dominant spark, Behind him marched 20 of his elite royal guards, their hands resting heavily on the pommels of their broadswords. The power rolling off the southern vanguard was staggering. In the shifter world, aura was everything, and Kael's aura was an apex predator's roar made silent. Kael stopped at the foot of the dais. He didn't bow deeply, he gave King Garrick a respectful, alpha-to-alpha nod of his head, his eyes never wavering. King Garrick, Kael's voice baritone through the hall, a rich, gravelly purr that made the lower-ranking Omegas in the room instinctively lower their heads. The South has kept its vow. I have crossed the great divide to claim the bridge of our peoples. Garrick gestured toward Elara. And the North honors its blood oath, Prince Kael. Behold my firstborn, Princess Elara. The purest blood of the Arctic line. Kael shifted his gaze upward. For the first time, his amber eyes locked onto Elara. In that single second, the entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. Everyone was waiting for the spark. In shifter royalty, the meeting of a fated treaty pair was supposed to trigger an immediate, explosive resonance, a visible flash of aura, a synchronized intake of breath, a mutual recognition of the beasts within. Nothing happened. The air between them remained completely dead. Kael's amber eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic flash of confusion, and then cold realization, crossing his features. He searched her face, his nostrils flaring slightly as he tried to catch the scent of her inner wolf. He found nothing but the faint, delicate scent of winter lilies and human skin. Elara felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. He knows, she realized, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He can't smell my wolf. He knows I'm a dud. A heavy, suffocating disappointment masked Kael's rugged features, replacing his initial curiosity with a look of stoic, professional detachment. To him, she wasn't a fated match, nor was she a powerful mate to strengthen his line. She was a frail, delicate requirement. A human-shaped contract he was forced to sign with his eyes closed. He stepped up the first tier of the dais, extending a large, heavily gauntleted hand toward her. The gold trim on his armor caught the candlelight, looking blindingly bright. Princess Elara, Kael said, his tone perfectly polite, yet completely devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a king executing a political transaction. Your beauty precedes you. I am ready to bind our kingdoms. Elara looked at his massive hand, then up into his beautifully ruthless face. She saw no hatred in his eyes, but worse, she saw a profound, dismissive pity. He looked at her the way an apex predator looks at a fragile piece of glass. Slowly, her human hand trembling inside her silk sleeve, Elara reached out and placed her fingers in his. The moment their skin met, a jolt of intense, fiery heat rushed up her arm, burning against her naturally cold skin. She flinched slightly, but Kael's grip closed around her fingers like a vice of golden iron. He turned her to face the crowd, raising their joined hands into the air. The great hall erupted into a deafening roar of cheers and howling wolves, celebrating a peace built on a lie. As the noise washed over her, Elara looked past the shouting warriors, out through the high glass windows toward the peak of the cold mountain. The blood moon was already beginning to rise, its bottom edge bleeding a deep, ominous crimson. The hour of the wedding was arriving, and her golden cage was officially locked. Chapter 2. The trek up the slopes of the cold mountain was a silent, grim procession. The wind had died down to a bitter, biting draft that froze the breath instantly. Hundreds of warriors from both the Frostclaw and Bloodstalker kingdoms lined the winding, snow-packed paths, holding massive torches aloft. The firelight flickered against the snow, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like a phantom army marching alongside them. At the vanguard of the line walked Elara and Kael. The heavy silk of Elara's wedding gown dragged through the fresh powder, staining the hem with moisture, but she barely felt the cold. Her entire upper body was entirely consumed by the unnatural, radiating heat coming from Kael. He walked beside her with rigid, military precision, his gauntlet hand firmly gripping her wrist. He wasn't holding her like a lover, he was holding her like a prize that had to be secured under lock and key. High above them, the sky was a canvas of nightmares. The shadow of the eclipse had swallowed 3/4 of the moon, leaving only a crescent edge that burned with a deep, bruised violet light. The rest of the lunar surface was a swirling vortex of deep blood red, casting an ominous, crimson glow over the jagged mountain peaks. The sky looked as though it were bleeding directly onto the snow. "Do not flinch when the shaman draws the knife," Kael said quietly, his voice cutting through the crunch of their boots in the snow. He didn't look at her, his amber eyes fixed entirely on the summit ahead. "Our warriors are watching. They already sense your lack of a beast, Elara. If you show fear now, they will smell it, and the treaty will begin with a scent of weakness." Elara tilted her head up, her pale blonde hair whipping across her face in the cold air. "You don't need to worry about my fear, Prince Kael. I have lived 18 years in a pack that wished I didn't exist. Your warriors cannot show me any cruelty I haven't already survived." Kael's jaw tightened. He paused for a fraction of a second, his amber eyes flashing down to meet her icy blue gaze. There was a sudden, fleeting spark of curiosity in his expression, a momentary realization that behind her delicate, human frame lay a spine made of northern iron. But just as quickly, his mask of royal indifference returned. "Good," he muttered, pulling her up the final, steep incline onto the plateau of the ancient altar of the divide. The black stone altar stood exactly as it had 18 years ago during the signing of the Treaty of Red Snow. The ancient bare-masked shaman stood waiting behind it, a jagged, meteorite iron ceremonial dagger clutched in his withered hands. The royal families took their places. King Garrick and King Magnus stood at opposite sides of the plateau, their massive, armored forms imposing against the bleeding sky. Below the plateau, a sea of thousands of wolves from both kingdoms gathered, their glowing eyes fixed on the altar, waiting for the vow to be finalized. The shaman raised his arms, chanting in a guttural, forgotten language that seemed to make the very rocks beneath their feet vibrate. Kael stepped up to the altar, pulling Elara with him. He placed his massive, gauntlet hand flat on the freezing black stone, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "I, Kael of the Crimson Throne, take this blood to bind my house to the north," he intoned, his dominant voice echoing over the mountains. The shaman stepped forward, lowering the meteorite blade. With a swift, practiced motion, he sliced open Kael's palm. Bright, steaming alpha blood immediately pooled on the dark stone. Then, the shaman turned to Elara. She felt her breath hitch as the cold iron blade hovered over her delicate skin. Kael reached out with his uninjured hand, his fingers clamping tightly around her wrist to hold her steady. His grip was warm, almost protective, as if he expected her to pull away. "Your vow, princess," the shaman whispered from behind his bone mask. Elara closed her eyes, looking up at the crimson eclipse. She extended her hand over the altar. The blade descended, slicing a clean line across her palm. The pain was sharp and cold, and as her pure, royal blood welled up, it flowed down to mingle with Kael's fiery heat on the ancient black stone. The blood ritual had begun. The treaty was moments away from being locked into the fabric of their souls. But at the exact second their blood fused, the final sliver of the white moon vanished, plunging the entire world into absolute, terrifying darkness. The darkness that slammed into the cold mountain was not a normal night. It was an absolute, suffocating void. The thousands of torches lining the slopes didn't just flicker, they died instantly, their flames snuffed out by an unseen, freezing pressure. A collective, panicked gasp rippled through the thousands of wolves gathered below the plateau. Then, the ground began to shake. It started as a low, deep tremor from the very roots of the mountain, a violent shudder that cracked the ancient ice surrounding the black stone altar. Elara stumbled, her human footing betrayed by the shifting earth, but Kael's grip on her bleeding wrist tightened to a bruising intensity. "Stand behind me," Kael roared, his dominant voice fighting the howling wind. Through the pitch-black air, a sudden, blinding flash of violet lightning arced across the sky. It didn't strike the peaks, it tore open a jagged rift in the center of the wedding plateau. Out of the rift poured a heavy, rolling mist that smelled of ozone, ancient earth, and cold starlight. And walking out of that mist came a pack that history had tried to bury. The Shadow Wolves. They did not look like the beasts of the north or the south. Their human forms were draped in cloaks of living darkness, their expressions chiseled from unyielding obsidian. At their front stood Silas. Silas was a nightmare made flesh. He was taller than Kael, his frame broader, moving with a silent, terrifying grace. He wore no gold or heavy iron, only dark, form-fitting midnight leather and a chest plate forged from meteorite steel that seemed to absorb the faint, bloody light of the eclipsed moon. His hair was a wild mane of black, but it was his eyes that paralyzed the entire peak. They were a brilliant, electric violet, pulsing with a dark, celestial energy that suffocated the air. "Step back, southern pup," Silas spoke. His voice wasn't a growl, it was a layered, reverberating echo that sounded like the mountain itself was speaking into everyone's minds. "Silas." King Garrick's voice broke the silence, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of rage and primal fear. "You are a myth. A ghost. Your line was banished to the Forbidden Woods 10 centuries ago. How dare you defile the Treaty of Red Snow?" Silas didn't even look at the old king. His violet eyes were locked entirely on Elara. The moment their gazes connected, a violent, invisible shockwave erupted from the altar. Elara felt a sudden, agonizingly beautiful heat explode within her chest, not the burning, localized heat of Kael's touch, but a deep, cosmic resonance that made her very bones hum. It was the spark. A bond so intense, so undeniable, that it shattered the ambient air. "The Treaty of Red Snow is a contract written by cowards," Silas said, stepping closer, each footstep leaving a frost pattern of violet starlight on the dark stone. "The law of the moon overrides the laws of men. The stolen bride prophecy has awakened. She is my bride." Kael roared, his amber eyes flashing a dominant gold as his inner wolf broke to the surface. With a deafening snarl, Kael shifted. In a fraction of a second, his human form exploded into a massive, shadow-black beast with eyes of molten gold, his jaws snapping as he lunged directly at Silas's throat. Silas didn't even draw a blade. He didn't shift. As Kael's massive wolf form reached him, Silas simply raised his left hand. A localized wave of lunar repulsion, a dense, pressurized wall of purple gravity, slammed into Kael's chest. The sound of the impact echoed like a thunderclap. Kael, the strongest prince of the south, was hurled backward 50 feet, his massive wolf body smashing into the stone pillars of the altar before crashing into the snow. Before King Garrick or King Magnus could unleash their armies, Silas bridged the space between himself and Elara in a single, teleporting stride. He didn't grab her roughly. He looked down at her bleeding palm, then gently closed his large, midnight-gloved hand over hers. The moment their blood mingled, the wound on Elara's hand stopped hurting, replaced by a soothing, starlight warmth. "They called you a dud because they couldn't handle your volume, Elara," Silas whispered, his violet eyes softening just for her. "Let them have their mountains of ice. You belong to the night." Silas swept her into his arms, his midnight cloak wrapping around her like a protective shield. "Kill him." King Magnus screamed from the southern ranks, his warriors shifting into a sea of crimson-furred beasts. But it was too late. Silas looked out at the advancing armies, a cold, majestic smile touching his lips. He snapped his fingers, and the rolling violet mist erupted into a blinding storm of cosmic dust. When the wind cleared a second later, the eclipse began to recede, and the torches flickered back to life. But the altar was empty. The peace of 1,000 years had been shattered in 5 minutes. The dud princess of the north was gone, and the great hunt for the stolen bride had officially begun. Chapter 3. The transition from the freezing peak of the cold mountain to the depths of the forbidden woods was like falling through a crack in reality. One moment Elara was surrounded by the furious roars of thousands of warriors, the next, the world fell into an unnatural, heavy silence. The trees here did not grow like normal wood. Their trunks were massive, twisting columns of obsidian black bark that stretched so high they completely blotted out the sky. Instead of leaves, their branches were draped in a glowing, bioluminescent moss that pulsed with a faint, violet starlight. The air was thick, carrying the scent of ancient moss, ozone, and a strange, electric magic that made the hairs on Elara's arms stand up. Silas sprinted through the dense terrain with a speed that defied the laws of physics. He didn't stumble over the gnarled roots or slip on the glowing patches of moss. He moved like a shadow passing through a lattice, bridging vast distances in single, effortless leaps. Elara remained tightly clutched against his chest, her heavy, diamond-encrusted silk wedding gown billowing behind them like a tattered flag of a defeated nation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but to her own shock, the terror she expected to feel wasn't there. Every time Silas's chest heaved, she felt that same cosmic resonance, the spark vibrating through her own bones. It was a strange, intoxicating anchor in the middle of chaos. Finally, Silas cleared a thick canopy of shifting briars and came to a halt in a secluded, circular glade. A small, pristine pool of liquid silver water rested in the center, reflecting the faint violet glow of the forest. He lowered her gently to her feet. The moment her satin wedding slippers touched the mossy ground, Elara stumbled backward, her knees weak from the kinetic rush of their escape. She instinctively raised her hands defensively, her torn, bleeding palm stinging as she glared up at the massive alpha. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but defiant. "Why have you brought me here? If you think you can use me to hold my father's kingdom ransom, you are wasting your time. I am a dud. To the frost claws, I am entirely disposable." Silas stood perfectly still, his tall, imposing figure framed by the alien glow of the woods. He looked down at her, his electric violet eyes burning with a deep, reverent intensity that had absolutely nothing to do with political games. Slowly, he reached up and pulled off his midnight-gloved hands, tossing them onto a nearby stone. He stepped toward her, his movements fluid and unhurried. Elara braced herself to run, but he simply sank to one knee in the glowing moss right in front of her. He gently reached out, his bare palm upturned, waiting. "Your hand, princess," he said, his voice a rich, layered echo that seemed to soothe the frantic rhythm of her heart. Elara hesitated, staring at his large, calloused hand. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible tide, she lowered her injured palm into his. The moment their skin met, a gasp escaped her lips. A torrent of cool, silver light flowed directly from Silas's skin into her wound. The jagged slice from the shaman's meteorite blade closed instantly, leaving behind nothing but smooth, unblemished skin and a lingering sensation of starlight warmth. "They lied to you, Elara," Silas said softly, looking up into her icy blue eyes. "They told you that you were a dud because your body didn't react to the primitive, bloodthirsty beast inside of them. They measure power by the size of a jaw and the loudness of a roar." He stood up, his presence towering but completely devoid of the suffocating, dominant malice she had felt from Kael and her father. "You aren't a prisoner here," Silas continued, gesturing to the glowing, shifting forest around them. "And you aren't a dud. The reason you never shifted into a wolf is because your spirit doesn't belong to a pack. It belongs to the cosmos. You are the catalyst, Elara. The environment of the north was too small, too cold to hold your frequency. But here, in the cradle of the old magic, you are exactly what the world has been waiting for." As he spoke, the violet moss beneath Elara's feet began to glow brighter, its light creeping up the hem of her white dress like a loyal hound welcoming its queen home. For the first time in 18 years, the hollow, empty void in her chest began to fill with a terrifying, beautiful power. Silas led Elara through a natural archway formed by two weeping obsidian trees, and the forest suddenly opened up. Nestled in a massive, deep basin within the heart of the woods lay the hidden sanctuary of the shadow wolves. It wasn't a brutal fortress of cold iron or rigid ice like the kingdoms she had known. The sanctuary was a breathtaking subterranean city carved from glowing purple fluorite and dark stone, woven seamlessly into the roots of the ancient forest. Waterfalls of liquid silver cascaded down the cavern walls, feeding into a glowing central lake that illuminated the thousands of faces gathered below. As Silas and Elara walked down the wide stone pathway, the inhabitants of the sanctuary stepped forward. Elara braced herself, expecting the familiar cold glares, the mocking whispers, or the bared teeth she had endured her entire life from the Frostclaw pack. But as she passed, the shadow wolves did something that shocked her to her core. They didn't growl. They didn't challenge her. One by one, warriors in sleek midnight armor and elders in starlight-woven robes bowed their heads in deep, silent reverence. They weren't bowing out of fear of Silas. Their eyes were fixed on Elara, wide with a profound, spiritual awe. "They aren't looking at a human parasite, Elara," Silas said softly, walking by her side. "They are looking at the northern sky finally coming home to the southern night." He led her to a grand, circular platform of polished black marble protruding over the silver lake. In the center of the platform stood the lunar focus, an ancient, jagged shard of dark meteorite stone that pulsed with a raw, unstable violet energy. Every alpha who claims leadership must stand before the focus and prove they can command the shadows, Silas explained, turning to face her. "The Frostclaws told you that you were empty. The truth is, you were a vessel waiting for the right current. Touch the stone, Elara. Let them see what you truly are." Elara stared at the pulsing meteorite. Her breath hitched. The old phantom fears of her 13th birthday, the memory of standing in the sacred grove while the entire pack watched her fail to shift, clawed at her throat. "I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking as she took a step back, her heavy silk wedding dress rustling against the marble. "What if nothing happens? What if I really am just nothing?" Silas stepped into her space, his towering form blocking out the rest of the cavern. He didn't use an alpha's command. Instead, he gently took her hand, his electric violet eyes locking onto her icy blue ones with absolute, unshakable faith. "You have spent 18 years letting them define your worth by what you couldn't do," Silas said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated straight to her soul. "Stop looking for the wolf inside you, Elara. Look for the sky." He released her hand. Elara swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the thousands of silent shifters watching her from the cliffs. She looked down at her tattered, diamond-encrusted gown, the symbol of her life as a political pawn. With a surge of sudden, defiant anger at everyone who had ever made her feel small, Elara stepped forward and slammed her bare, human palm flat against the dark meteorite stone. For a terrifying second, there was absolute silence. Then, the world shattered. A violent, blinding pillar of pure, violet celestial energy erupted from the meteorite stone, shooting straight up into the cavern ceiling and tearing through the canopy of the forest toward the heavens. The impact of the magic sent a massive shockwave across the silver lake, causing the water to rise in majestic, shimmering waves. Elara didn't scream. She threw her head back as a sensation of pure, unadulterated ecstasy flooded her veins. The hollow void in her chest was gone, replaced by a roaring galaxy of power. Her long, pale blonde hair ripped free from its silver pins, lifting into the air as the strands began to glow with floating violet sparks and dark stellar dust. Her skin didn't turn to fur, it began to shimmer with a translucent, marble-white radiance, veined with pulsing lines of liquid silver starlight. The heavy, suffocating wedding dress she wore began to tear and burn away at the edges, the white silk absorbing the dark energy until it transformed into a flowing, midnight-gowned cloud of cosmic mist that pulled around her feet. She lifted her hand from the stone, and as she did, 3 massive orbs of violet gravity began to slowly orbit her body, humming at a frequency that made the very foundations of the mountain tremble. She wasn't an omega. She wasn't a shifter. She was a goddess of the void. The entire sanctuary of the shadow wolves instantly dropped to their knees, slamming their fists against their chests in a deafening, unified salute. Silas stood at the edge of the platform, a proud, majestic smile crossing his features as his own violet eyes flared with immense heat. He bowed his head to her, not as a master to a prisoner, but as a king recognizing his true, eternal queen. Elara looked down at her glowing, starlight-veined hands, a cold, breathless smile finally touching her lips. The dead princess of the north was officially dead. The catalyst had awakened, and she finally had the power to make both kingdoms burn for what they did to her. Chapter 4. The Obsidian Keep, the ancestral seat of the Bloodstalker Kingdom, was a place of crushing heat and oppressive opulence. Unlike the silent, reflective ice of the north, the southern fortress was built from jagged volcanic rock, illuminated by rivers of liquid magma that flowed through reinforced trenches in the stone floors. The air constantly tasted of sulfur, ash, and a heavy, suffocating dominant aura. In the center of the Grand War Council chamber, a heavy obsidian chalice flew across the room, shattering against a pillar of volcanic stone. Humiliated. Before the entire continent. King Magnus roared, his massive, gold-flecked crimson armor expanding as his chest heaved with monstrous rage. His amber eyes were fully bloodshot, the dominant pressure rolling off his body so intense that the half-dozen high-ranking generals at the war table stood with their heads bowed, their inner wolves whimpering in submission. "The Treaty of Red Snow is a joke," Magnus continued, slamming both hands onto the stone table, cracking the polished surface. "Garrick offers us a broken, shiftless girl, and then allows a myth, a pack of banished forest scum, to walk onto our sacred altar and steal the future of our empire. They laugh at us in the borderlands, Kael." Prince Kael sat perfectly still at the far end of the table. He had stripped off his golden ceremonial armor, now wearing only a simple, dark leather tunic that showed the heavy wrapping of bandages across his chest. The physical memory of the cosmic force Silas had slammed into him. His features were chiseled into a mask of absolute, unreadable stone. "We are mobilizing the entire southern vanguard," Magnus commanded, pointing a clawed finger at his son. "We will march into the Frostclaw territory, demand their heads for this insult, and then we will burn the Forbidden Woods to ash. You will lead the spearhead, Kael. You will reclaim your property and tear that shadow bastard's throat out." The generals roared in agreement, slamming their fists against their chests. But Kael didn't move. He didn't join the war cry. Slowly, Kael stood up. His towering frame instantly drew the room's attention. Even injured, his presence as the alpha heir was undeniable, a heavy, suffocating heat that rivaled his father's. "No," Kael said, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the bloodthirsty shouting like a heavy blade. The room fell dead silent. King Magnus' eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening into a dangerous, predatory snarl. "What did you say?" "I said no, father," Kael repeated, his amber eyes locking onto his father's without a single hint of fear. "We will not mobilize the vanguard. And we will not declare war on the north. Are you a coward?" Magnus hissed, stepping around the table, his massive shadow looming over his son. "He threw you into the dirt like a weak pup. He took the woman meant to bear your heirs. Your pride should be demanding their blood." "My pride is fine," Kael replied coldly. "But my brain is still functioning. You want to march an army into the Forbidden Woods? You didn't feel the magic that took her, father. You didn't stand on that peak. Silas didn't use pack magic. He didn't use an alpha's command. He controlled the very gravity of the mountain. If we send our warriors into those trees, we aren't sending them to war, we are sending them to a slaughterhouse. Then what do you propose?" Magnus growled. "We sit here and do nothing while they mock the Crimson Throne?" "The treaty was for a pure-blooded female of the Arctic line," Kael said, turning his back on the war table and walking toward the high balcony overlooking the smoking volcanic valley. "But Elara is not what they told us she was. She is not a dud. She is not weak." Kael leaned his heavy hands against the stone railing, looking out toward the dark, jagged silhouette of the Great Divide Mountains in the distance. His father believed he was acting out of strategic caution, but the truth inside Kael's chest was far more dangerous. For the past 3 days, since the moment the world had gone dark on the altar, Kael hadn't slept for a single hour. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see the face of a political contract. He didn't see a frail, human-scented princess. He saw her eyes. He remembered the exact moment Silas had touched her hand, the visible, explosive spark of a fated cosmic bond that had completely bypassed him. He remembered the look of raw, unyielding iron in Elara's icy blue gaze when she told him she had survived worse things than his warrior's cruelty. He had spent his entire life surrounded by women who bowed to his strength, who craved his alpha heat. But Elara? Elara had looked at him like he was just a golden-armored obstacle. And the memory of her scent, the sudden, terrifying transition from delicate winter lilies to a deep, intoxicating pull of dark starlight, was driving his inner wolf completely insane. His beast wasn't howling for revenge or for a broken treaty. His beast was clawing at his ribs, demanding to find the girl who had stolen the night. "I will go into the forbidden woods," Kael said quietly, not turning around. "But I will go alone. If she is a prisoner, I will bring her back to fulfill the oath. If she is something else, I will find out exactly what kind of monster we are dealing with." "And if you die in those woods?" Magnus asked, his voice low and threatening. Kael's amber eyes flashed a brilliant, dominant gold in the dim light of the volcanic valley. A reckless, dangerous smile touched his lips. "Then the South will know it needs a stronger king," he muttered. Without waiting for his father's permission, Kael gripped his heavy broadsword from the table, draped his dark cloak over his shoulders, and walked out of the council chamber, stepping directly into the shadows of a hunt he was no longer sure he wanted to win. The air inside the sunken amphitheater was thick with the scent of crushed pine and centuries of damp moss. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of the forbidden woods, the ancient ruins were a labyrinth of crumbling obsidian pillars that leaned inward, like old men whispering secrets to the earth. Elara stood in the center of the moss-covered arena, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She was no longer wearing the tattered silk of her wedding dress. She had traded it for a practical, close-fitting tunic of midnight blue wool and sturdy leather trousers provided by the Shadow Wolves. Her pale blonde hair was tied back in a high, fierce braid, though several stray strands whipped wildly around her face, animated by the erratic, unstable currents of energy radiating from her skin. Again, Silas's deep voice echoed from the top of a stone tier. He sat on a fractured obsidian block, his long legs crossed, his electric violet eyes tracking her every movement with a gaze that was entirely unyielding, yet fiercely attentive. He wasn't playing the part of a gentle savior today. He was an instructor forging a weapon. "I can't," Elara panted, her human muscles aching, her sweat-slicked palms trembling. "The weight, it's too much. It feels like the entire sky is pressing down on my chest." "That is because you are still fighting the dark, Elara," Silas said, stepping down from the tier with a fluid, predatory grace. He stopped a few paces from her, his presence a towering anchor of calm authority. "You spent 18 years trying to keep your light contained so the frost claws wouldn't fear you. Out here, containment is death. If you don't control the void, it will collapse and swallow you whole." Silas raised his bare left hand. Instantly, the shadows pooling around his boots surged upward, twisting into three massive, hound-shaped entities made of living, shifting darkness. Their eyes burned with the same electric violet light as his own, their jaws snapping with an eerie, silent hunger. "This is the trial by shadow," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, reverberating frequency. "These phantoms don't attack your flesh. They feed on your self-doubt. They are the manifestations of every voice that ever told you that you were a dud, a failure, a political sacrifice. If you let them reach you, they will drain your energy until you are nothing but an empty shell." With a flick of his wrist, the shadow hounds leaped forward, tearing across the mossy stone with terrifying speed. Elara's instinct screaming at her to run, to flee just as she had from the bullies in her father's ice castle. But there was nowhere to go. As the first hound lunged, its shadowy jaws wide, the phantom voice of her mother, Queen Vanya, echoed in her mind, "A dud or not, tonight you become the bride of the South." "No." Elara screamed, her anger flaring hotter than her fear. She slammed her boots into the earth and threw her hands outward. A violent pulse of dark celestial energy exploded from her palms. A localized wave of lunar gravity erupted, creating a dense, purple barrier of pressurized air directly in front of her. The first shadowhound slammed into the barrier and instantly disintegrated into harmless smoke. But the other two hounds redirected, flanking her from the left and right. The air grew suddenly freezing, and the mocking whispers of the Frostclaw warriors filled her ears, useless. A parasite. A broken link in the chain. Elara felt the crushing weight of their disdain pressing down on her shoulders, forcing her down to one knee. Her violet aura began to flicker and dim. "They are right," she whispered, her eyes stinging with tears of exhaustion. "I am just a human girl trapped in a war of monsters. Look at me, Elara." Silas's command shattered the mental illusions, his voice a roaring thunderbolt of absolute conviction. He didn't use an alpha's pack compulsion, he used the raw, spiritual pull of the cosmic bond that tied their souls together. "They built a box for a wolf, and they threw you inside because they couldn't see that you were a star. You are the eternal Luna. Ground your heels, empty your mind, and show these woods who commands the night." The word chosen echoed through her mind, but for the first time it didn't mean a treaty or a forced marriage. It meant her choice. With a guttural cry of raw defiance, Elara dug her fingers into the mossy stone. She stopped fighting the heavy, suffocating pressure in her chest. She opened the floodgates and let it out. A massive, blinding shockwave of violet and silver starlight exploded outward from her body in a perfect, expanding circle. The sheer, kinetic force of the gravity wave didn't just dissipate the remaining shadowhounds, it shattered two of the ancient obsidian pillars, reducing the ancient stone to dust, and sent a visible tremor rippling through the forest for miles. The air snapped with static electricity as the dust settled. Elara stood slowly, her breath stabilizing. Her skin was a translucent, marble-white radiance, veined with pulsing lines of liquid silver starlight that glowed with a terrifying beauty. 3 massive orbs of violet gravity spun in a slow, flawless orbit around her waist, completely under her command. She wasn't panting anymore. She looked up at Silas, her icy blue eyes now flecked with brilliant rings of electric violet. Silas walked into the center of the ruined arena, a dangerous, breathless smile touching his lips as he looked at the destruction she had caused. He stopped right in front of her, leaning down until his eyes were level with hers. "Excellent," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a deep, predatory pride. "Your father's kingdom is built on ice, Elara. The southern kingdom is built on fire. But you? You just learned how to manipulate the fabric of reality. Let them come for their stolen bride. They have no idea they are marching into a trap." Chapter 5. The outer defenses of the Shadow Wolf Sanctuary did not rely on physical walls, but on a twisting labyrinth of illusions and crushing gravity fields. Yet, Prince Kael had not survived 100 duels by being weak. Driven by a desperate, relentless obsession, his inner alpha beast had literally scented its way through the magical currents of the Forbidden Woods. He moved like a golden ghost through the dark trees, his dark leather tunic shredded from briars, his face smudged with ash, and his breathing heavy. In his right hand, he held the massive, golden-laid ancestral broadsword of the Bloodstalkers. With a final, brutal swing of his blade, Kael cut through a dense wall of weeping obsidian vines and stepped out onto the high, circular marble platform overlooking the Silver Lake. "Elara." Kael's gravelly voice roared through the cavern, a desperate, dominant wave of heat that instantly put the entire subterranean city on high alert. From the shadows of the surrounding cliffs, hundreds of Shadow Wolf warriors materialized, their bows drawn and spears leveled at the lone prince. But before they could lunge, a calm, terrifyingly cold voice echoed from the center of the platform. "Hold your blades." Kael's amber eyes snapped toward the sound. He froze, his grip loosening on the hilt of his broadsword as his jaw dropped. Standing beside the ancient lunar focus was Elara. But she was unrecognizable. The frail, terrified girl in the tight silk wedding dress was entirely gone. She stood tall, her frame draped in a majestic, flowing gown of midnight blue cosmic mist that seemed to hold a galaxy of swirling stars within its fabric. Her long, pale blonde hair floated gently in the air, pulsing with violet sparks. Her skin radiated a flawless, marble-white luminescence veined with liquid silver starlight, and 3 massive orbs of violet gravity spun in a slow, ominous orbit around her waist. She looked like a goddess who had just descended from the stars. And standing half a step behind her, his arms crossed over his chest with a smirk of absolute amusement, was Silas. "You." Kael stammered, his alpha pride momentarily failing him as he looked at her transformation. "Elara? What have they done to you?" "They didn't do anything to me, Kael," Elara said, her voice dropping to a smooth, layered melody that resonated with the power of the very cavern. She stepped forward, the orbs of gravity humming louder as they tracked her movement. "They simply gave me the space to stop pretending I was small." "She doesn't need your rescuing, southern pup," Silas sneered, stepping into the light, his electric violet eyes flaring with dangerous heat. "You brought a sword to a temple. You crossed into our domain alone. I should tear your throat out right here and feed your beast to the forest." "Try it, shadow bastard." Kael roared, his amber eyes flashing a brilliant, dominant gold as his inner wolf broke to the surface. With a deafening snarl, Kael lunged across the marble platform, his broadsword raised to cleave Silas in two. Silas didn't flinch, his hand moving to ignite his own dark celestial energy to meet the attack. A visceral, 3-way confrontation was about to tear the platform apart. But Elara didn't wait for them to collide. "I said enough," Elara commanded. She didn't growl. She didn't shout. But as the words left her lips, she slammed her foot onto the black marble. An instantaneous, absolute wave of pressurized lunar gravity exploded from her body. The sheer, crushing force of the kinetic wave didn't just stop Kael midair, it slammed him violently down onto his knees, the marble cracking beneath his boots. The immense pressure simultaneously caught Silas, forcing the powerful Shadow Alpha to stumble back 3 steps, his violet aura flickering in shock. The entire cavern fell dead silent. Thousands of shadow wolves watched from the cliffs in absolute, breathless awe as the dead princess held 2 of the most powerful alphas on the continent completely pinned with a casual flick of her wrist. Kael knelt in the slush and cracked stone, his chest heaving, his broadsword clattering to the floor. He looked up at her through his dark curls, the crushing gravity making it hard to breathe, but his eyes weren't filled with anger. They were filled with a profound, staggering realization. She hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't been forced into a new cage. She was already ruling. Elara slowly lowered her hand, easing the heavy gravity just enough to let Kael breathe, though she kept the orbs of energy humming dangerously close to his chest. She walked down the steps of the dais, her midnight gown trailing cosmic dust, until she stood directly over the kneeling southern prince. "Look at me, Kael," Elara said softly, her icy blue eyes flecked with violet light as she looked down at him. "Do I look like a treaty bride who needs to be taken back to a golden cage? Do I look like a piece of property meant to seal a coward's vow?" Kael swallowed hard, the intense heat of his inner wolf completely fading as he looked into the face of a queen who had outgrown both of their worlds. The summit of the cold mountain was a frozen battlefield waiting for a spark. Under the massive, overwhelming glare of a celestial supermoon, which hung so low and large in the night sky that it seemed ready to crush the peaks, the entire military might of the shifter world had gathered. To the north stood the white-furred ranks of the Frostclaw pack, their weapons drawn and faces twisted in betrayal. To the south stood the crimson-clad legions of the Bloodstalkers, their alphas bearing their fangs, demanding the blood of the thieves. In the center of the plateau, behind the ancient, cracked altar of the divide, stood the two furious kings, Alpha King Garrick and Alpha King Magnus. "Your son has failed us, Magnus," Garrick roared, his icy blue eyes flashing with dominant rage. "He went into those woods to reclaim the bride, and instead, he has vanished. The treaty is dead, and the curse of the broken vow is upon us." "Silence, Garrick," Magnus spat back, his gold-flecked crimson armor vibrating with raw heat. "If your daughter wasn't a broken, shiftless freak, the shadow scum would never have targeted her. We will tear this mountain apart before we let." The mountain has already spoken. A layered, echoing melody cut through the howling wind, instantly silencing both kings. The thousands of warriors on the slopes gasped, many instinctively stepping backward as the temperature on the plateau dropped to a freezing, static-charged absolute zero. Walking out of the tree line, completely unbothered by the opposing armies, came Elara. She walked with the slow, terrifying grace of an immortal queen. Her midnight blue gown of cosmic mist trailed starlight across the snow, and her marble-white skin radiated a brilliant, silver luminescence. The three massive orbs of violet gravity spun in a slow, flawless orbit around her waist, humming with a power that made the very air warp around her. And walking flanking her, one on each side, were the two most powerful young alphas on the continent, Silas, his violet eyes flashing with dark celestial energy, and Kael, his ancestral broadsword resting calmly on his shoulder, his amber eyes burning not with rage, but with absolute allegiance to the girl between them. "Elara?" King Garrick stammered, his jaw dropping as he took in his daughter's divine transformation. What sorcery is this? Where is your wolf?" "I never had a wolf, father," Elara said, her voice carrying a pressurized weight that forced the front ranks of warriors to lower their spears in submission. She stopped exactly in front of the ancient altar where her blood had been spilled a month ago. "You spent 18 years trying to measure a star by the size of a wolf's jaw. You built a cage of ice and called it a palace. You signed my life away to a stranger just to keep your empires from burning. You are a princess of the north." King Magnus roared, stepping forward, his claws extending. "You belong to the south by right of blood and treaty. Kael, claim your property. Tear that shadow bastard apart and bring her to the altar." Prince Kael didn't move towards Silas. Instead, he stepped forward and did something that shattered the political foundations of both kingdoms. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Kael drove his ancestral broadsword deep into the frozen earth at Elara's feet. He unclasped his golden-trimmed crimson royal cape and let it drop into the slush. "I renounce my crown," Kael's deep, gravelly voice baritoned over the peak, sending shockwaves through the southern legions. "I do not claim Princess Elara as a bride, nor do I claim her as property. The treaty was built on the lie that love can be chained by old men in gold armor. I choose to serve the night. Traitor! Magnus screamed, but before he could lunge at his son, Silas stepped forward, his electric violet eyes flaring with a blinding intensity. Silas raised his left hand, and the shadows pooling on the mountain slopes rose like a massive, 50-foot wall of living darkness, boxing in both royal armies. The treaty of red snow is dead, kings. The prophecy spoke of a union that would birth a being powerful enough to end the era of Pax. It didn't mean a child born of a forced bed. It meant this. Elara raised both her hands toward the low-hanging supermoon. Instantly, the 3 orbs of gravity around her waist shot into the sky, expanding into a massive dome of purple energy that covered the entire summit. The sheer, kinetic pressure of her aura was so vast, so undeniably supreme, that both King Garrick and King Magnus were forced down to their knees in the snow, their ancient alpha dominance completely crushed by her cosmic frequency. Elara looked down at the kneeling kings, her icy blue eyes flecked with brilliant violet starlight. The old laws of the pack are broken, Elara decreed, her voice vibrating through the souls of every warrior present. From this night onward, rank is no longer inherited by bloodlines, and hearts are no longer signed away by treaties. Rank is earned, but love is chosen. If you wish to fight us, your empires will turn to ash before the sun rises. If you wish to survive, you will bow to the new dawn. A long, breathless silence hung over the mountain. Then, slowly, a single Frostclaw warrior dropped his sword and knelt in the snow. Then another. Within moments, a domino effect of clattering steel echoed across the peak as thousands of warriors from all 3 packs, North, South, and Shadow, dropped to their knees, slamming their fists against their chests in a deafening, unified salute to the eternal Luna. The old era was officially over. The stolen bride had broken the world, and she was about to build a new one from the ruins. The epilogue. A year had passed since the night the sky bled over the cold mountain, and the world was no longer recognizable to those who had ruled it. Deep within the heart of the once feared Forbidden Woods, the shadows had opened up to welcome the light. Nestled in the great basin where a hidden sanctuary used to sit, the citadel of the New Dawn now towered into the sky. It was an architectural masterpiece that defied the old ways, not a brutal fortress of cold, unyielding ice or a suffocating keep of burning stone, but a majestic metropolis woven seamlessly into the living forest. Structures of delicate, glowing starlight glass and polished obsidian rose alongside the ancient trees. Cascading waterfalls of liquid silver illuminated the open-air courtyards where children from the north, the south, and the shadow packs played together without fear, their laughter echoing through a canopy that used to witness only exile. High on the sunlit central balcony of the grand pavilion, Elara stood looking out over her kingdom. The harsh, eternal winter of her childhood had receded from her soul. The morning sun was rising, casting a warm, golden glow over the valley, illuminating the vibrant green of the forest floor and the strange, beautiful silver-veined flowers that had begun to bloom wherever her celestial magic touched the earth. Elara was dressed in a structured, elegant gown of charcoal gray wool and woven silver thread, a deliberate blend of the practical northern craftsmanship and the regal starlight of the night. Her long, pale blonde hair fell loosely over her shoulders, no longer pinned back like a prisoner's crown. Her skin still carried that faint, flawless marble-white luminescence, but the volatile, destructive gravity orbs of the past year were gone, replaced by a deep, absolute aura of serene authority. The northern emissaries have just arrived at the lower gates, a rich, familiar voice resonated from the doorway. Elara turned, a genuine smile softening her features as Silas stepped onto the balcony. The Shadow Alpha looked majestic in the morning light, his midnight leather armor polished, his electric violet eyes warm as he walked to her side. He didn't stand in front of her as a master, nor did he hide behind her. He wrapped an arm gently around her waist, their shared cosmic spark humming with a peaceful, grounding warmth. They brought the seasonal grain, Silas continued, looking down at the bustling courtyard below. And a message from your father. He asks if the eternal Luna will honor the frost claws with a visit during the next solstice. Tell him I will consider it, Elara said softly, resting her hand over Silas's. But my place is here, guarding the bridge we built. Speaking of guards, Silas chuckled, nodding toward the courtyard below. Elara looked down. Standing at the center of the grand training grounds was Kael. The proud southern prince had found his true destiny not by sitting on a stolen crimson throne, but by protecting the peace that had saved his beast. He had stripped off his heavy, golden-laid royal plates, wearing the practical, clean dark leather armor of the Citadel's first guardian. He was surrounded by a dozen young Omega boys and girls from various packs, teaching them how to balance a short sword. His amber eyes burned with a bright, clear heat, a deep laugh rumbled through his chest as he corrected a young pup's posture. He looked up, catching Elara's gaze on the balcony. Kael didn't bow in fear. He raised his fist to his chest in a respectful, fiercely loyal salute. He was no longer a golden-armored brute executing a transaction. He was a protector of the dawn. Elara returned the salute, a profound sense of peace finally settling into the marrow of her bones. A year ago, they had called her a dud. They had called her weak, a parasite, a broken link in a chain of apex predators. They had built a box for a wolf and thrown her inside because they were too blind to see that she belonged to the sky. But as she looked out over the unified citadel, where alphas and omegas walked as equals, she realized the truth of the journey that had broken the world. You aren't broken because you don't fit into the box they built for you, Elara thought, the cosmic magic inside her humming in perfect harmony with the rising sun. You are simply being prepared for a purpose they can't even begin to imagine. And that, my beautiful pack, is the end of the Alpha's stolen bride. Thank you so much for embarking on this journey with me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves a good underdog romance. Until next time on Lily's Heart Tales, keep looking at the stars.